Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I interview founders, co-founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, artists, musicians, you name it, in the world of crypto and blockchain all around the world. And today, and sometimes I talk about sustainability, and those podcasts end up being really great ones. And today I have an amazing guest from the Filecoin Green team. She is the Environmental Data Partnerships Manager. Her name is Caitlin Moore. Caitlin, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very excited to be here and to chat with you today.
I'm excited too. So it's an honor and pleasure. Thank you for joining me. Let's kick things off. And the first question I ask everybody is this, is what is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
That is such a lovely way to phrase that question. I think my initial answer to that is like maybe not a logical background, but it does tie into a lot of the work that I'm doing now. So I've been in the space for 2 years with the Filecoin Green team at Protocol Labs. My background before getting into Web3 was actually in the nonprofit space. And so I did a lot of different work with local nonprofits where I'm from in Arizona. And a lot of those were sustainability nonprofits. So focusing on kind of coalition building, on partnerships, on education around those things. And then the nonprofit that I worked for the longest and did like the widest breadth of work for was actually a teen dating violence, domestic violence nonprofit. So focused on educating young people. I did victim advocacy there. I did the education piece, the coalition building. And then I would say like the last year of my work there focused more on the data piece, which is where I think that kind of ties into how I got into this space. And basically like we had as a nonprofit where we were getting grant funding from a variety of different sources, we were always struggling with how do we prove our impacts to those funders, to our stakeholders, our biggest stakeholder being grant funders. And so there's not a lot of great tools for data management. And even then in a nonprofit, when you're on limited funding, a lot of the time your focus isn't on like, how do I manage my data really well? And, how do I prove my impacts to these funders, to these stakeholders? And so with that nonprofit, I worked with our team to build out a data management system and kind of best practices around going from that raw data, that quantitative, qualitative data, the stories that we were making on the ground, and how do you take that and go to grant funders and be able to prove that these are our impacts and actually being able to prove it, because it's something that's really important for, if someone's putting money into a nonprofit, they want to know that my money is going to things that are making a big impact. And so I kind of built out that pipeline. And then I got really interested. I've always been interested in tech, but specifically like very interested in the intersection of technology and sustainability. And so that kind of brought me into this Web3 world. I knew about nothing of Web3 or blockchain or crypto when I got into the space 2 years ago. And I would not call myself an expert on those three things, but I do have a lot of knowledge now, thankfully, about the intersection of those things with sustainability, which has been super cool.
Awesome. I have a follow-up, but I'm going to ask you that after I ask the next question I had planned. There's Filecoin, and then there's the Filecoin Green team, right?
Yes.
So what's the difference between the two? What's the Filecoin Green team all about? And then what makes it an amazing endeavor?
Yeah, so Filecoin Green is a project out of Protocol Labs. Protocol Labs is the creator of IPFS and Filecoin, which are decentralized global data storage networks. All of this is just a little bit of context for those who maybe don't know. All of the data that's stored on IPFS and Filecoin is content address, which ensures that the data is immutable. There's data integrity there, so it's tamper resistant, and then it also enables interoperability because the identifier of that data is linked to the actual data and not the location of the data. So like in the traditional kind of Web2 world, we have URLs, which is linking that data to the specific location that it's stored at. On IPFS and Filecoin, it's linked to the actual data itself. And so all of that's a very long-winded way to say that at Filecoin Green, we're a project that started as kind of a response to this question of how do you verifiably decarbonize a global network of storage providers, and how do you do that in a Web3 native way? And so we are a project that's a part of Filecoin, that's a part of Protocol Labs. Our two key focuses are really on, one, the verifiable decarbonization of the network, and then two, building blockchain infrastructure for projects and for companies to be able to make transparent and verifiable environmental claims. And our work is always starting with the Filecoin network itself. So again, like, how do we decarbonize the network in a transparent way? And then I think our kind of ultimate goal is going beyond that into how do we make environmental accounting a Web3 superpower. And so that's kind of our whole theory of change.
Interesting. Now I'm going to go back to my follow-up. You've been around 2 years. Old narrative in blockchain has been, identity for the unidentified, has been banking the unbanked. The third one, not a lot of people know about this, is a voice for the voiceless. And you were in victim advocacy.
Yep.
How do you bring that voice of the voiceless into what you're doing now at Filecoin Green? What do people need to know?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, yeah, and that's something I really didn't know about Web3 until I got into it, was just like how, like, really what we're trying to do is giving the voice to the voiceless. It's like giving identity to the unidentified, giving financial, power to those who don't have it, like, ingrained in the systems already. And so I think for me, I'm always thinking about accessibility. And I think that kind of ties into this question of, like, giving voice to the voiceless, is like, how are we making these things accessible? Not just from like a user interface perspective, but like, how are we making sure that we're incorporating voices into this narrative, and particularly with sustainability, how are we making sure that we're including those who are most significantly impacted by the climate crisis? And so I think one of the main ways that we've kind of done that, that I'm super proud of, is an initiative called the Sustainable Blockchain Summit. And so we started this 2 years ago as kind of just like a coalition building, a conference to bring together people from the sustainability world, from the blockchain crypto world, that have these expertise and knowledge in these things that are seemingly separate, bringing them together to have a voice and to be able to share about like what their pain points are, and see where on either side of the coin we can address those pain points that somebody else is having. And so with that, going back to that question of giving the voice to the voiceless, and the accessibility that I think is so important to me, is how do we make learning about this world and events and getting connected to these things more accessible? And so the most recent way that we did that was actually by making the conference fully virtual. Before, we had done them alongside crypto events mostly. So like ECC, we did one in Paris last year. We've also done them alongside sustainability events. So earlier this year, we held the Sustainable Blockchain Summit in Boston alongside MIT's Energy Conference. So again, bringing in people from all sides of the coin, but with a virtual one. Obviously traveling all over the world to go to crypto conferences is not very accessible. So our kind of theory with the virtual one is that we're able to meet people where they're at and show them the benefits of these technologies. And by enabling that, I think education is power. And so giving people the opportunity to connect and learn about these things that they maybe traditionally haven't been able to or haven't had access to is really important for getting their voices involved. And we do a lot of work with projects who are making more direct impacts on the ground as well, working with project developers, like in the carbon credit space, working with project developers that are on the ground in Africa, that are on the ground in Southeast Asia and in Latin America. And I think, yeah, that's something that I never would have expected coming into the space that I'd be able to be a part of. And it's been awesome to see that. And honestly, just all in Web3, I think people just have a really great outlook on life, and I think are moving things in the direction that they need to go. And like, that's something that's super important for me, coming from that nonprofit kind of social impact background.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my next question, we're gonna dig into carbon credits a little later.
Mhm.
I want to know how, like, you have an energy validation process, right?
Right.
How that works. You know, mentioned data earlier, how you're able to validate information in a world of, disparate and conflicting data. How's that work?
Yeah. So yeah, our Filecoin energy validation process is this really, in my opinion, comprehensive and rigorous accounting exercise that we've built out. And so, like I said earlier, our goal is kind of to decarbonize the Filecoin network, and any good decarbonization effort needs to have that accounting exercise tied with it. You need to figure out like just how much am I emitting, how much renewable energy am I using. You have to have like the raw data, the numbers behind that to actually be able to reduce those impacts or connect to renewable energy or carbon credits. And so we work really closely with Filecoin storage providers, which are just essentially data centers, to build an emissions profile that includes information and data about their energy use, their hardware makeup, even looking at things like their local grid. I think that's something that's super important for our process because, again, we are like a global network of storage providers. I think we have like 35 or 3,600 storage providers all over the globe. And what a lot of people don't maybe know or don't think about is that like your energy use and your energy makeup is kind of dependent on the area that you're in. So like if I'm in the middle of nowhere in like Iowa, it's going to be harder for me to access things like renewable energy versus, I don't know, in somewhere like Switzerland where they have that very readily available on the grid. So that's also an important factor in being able to make up this kind of emissions profile for a storage provider. And so once we have all that data, we work really closely with, like I said, Filecoin storage providers to get that data. And we're also working on like some incentives of like, how do you get people to share that information and that data with you. So being able to unlock like green funding for these storage providers is something that we're excited about and looking at. But once we get that data, we then work with a third-party auditor. We work with this group called Anthesis that does a lot of sustainability auditing. And I think another cool thing about our process is that we're taking kind of the traditional manual work of third-party auditing it and marrying it with the Web3 way of doing things, which is like cryptographic proofs and provenance tracking. And so for us, that's specifically like tying everything to IPFS. We put all of the data, all of the auditors work to validate that data and their signature saying like, yes, this data is accurate. We put all of that on IPFS, on, decentralized storage. And then once all of that is complete, everything's validated, we are able to give storage providers a green score, and that green score is their claim about how sustainable they are. And again, all of that information, the validation behind that data is open and audible. It's on the decentralized web. And so, on the other side of things, if I'm an individual who has data that I want to store on Filecoin and I want to do it with a specific storage provider that is storing with 100% renewable energy, which we do have storage providers that are doing that. I can go to our websites. We have greenscores.xyz, which has a bunch of different storage providers that have gone through this process. I can go to the Filecoin energy dashboard and see the actual, calculations and the actual data behind these claims that a storage provider is making. So if I want to store it on 100% renewable, 100% renewable energy data center, then I can look at the actual data behind that claim. I don't have to kind of just depend on the word of this storage provider. And I think that's really important. And I think that aligns really well with Web3 values. So like our whole process is all out in the open. We're doing a lot of work to match storage providers with renewable energy. And then with kind of that auditable pipeline, that's another focus area that our team is really going in on for the upcoming year is we're building a product called Operad that we're super excited for. And that is that kind of infrastructure piece that enables you to see that entire data pipeline of going from data on this side to this claim on this side and everything in between.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right. So you mentioned the green scorecard. I'm gonna get into that in a little bit. First, I want to get the land here, the overall global landscape of intersection of climate act? Because you mentioned your summit, and I want to go to it next time. Um,
Yes.
it sounds awesome. Um, the overall global landscape of the intersection of climate activities and crypto or blockchain, what does that look like currently?
Yeah, I think it's been really cool for me to again come into this space 2 years ago. Even I had this kind of notion of like crypto is bad for the environment. And so it's been cool over the past 2 years. Obviously, I think there are people that still kind of have that conception, but I've really seen a shift in the narrative from crypto's bad for the environment to there's actually some really awesome, clear benefits of this technology for sustainability. And I think one of the big testaments to that, in my eyes, is that we have a huge presence of Web3, blockchain, refi, regenerative finance companies that have a presence at like huge climate weeks and climate events. Like there was a huge presence of Web3 companies at New York City Climate Week this year, at COP, which is like the United Nations biggest climate change convention, like literally biggest in the world. At COP last year, which was in Egypt, and this year in Dubai, there's a huge presence of Web3 companies. And I think that's really just like a testament to these two worlds becoming more aligned with each other. And I think just in general, you know, there's a ton of work going on in this space with like carbon credits, and that's an area where interoperability and transparency are really, really desperately needed. And I think honestly, carbon credits are just the tip of the iceberg. I think Web3 and blockchain just in general have the ability to really scale up climate finance to make really big impacts on the ground. And there's awesome work going on in like supply chains. I think also something that's really like still kind of developing and evolving a little bit is this intersection between AI and blockchain and sustainability. So like there's a ton of really important use cases of AI and machine learning models in climate. And there's a whole movement of people that want to marry those things, the climate, the AI, the ML, with verifiability and openness and auditability that Web3 technologies enable. So I think like, obviously I'm like very in the weeds on the space and I would hope I would be excited about it, but those are some of the like main things that I see and I'm like, oh yeah, we're doing really awesome work. And the coolest part of all is that we're doing it in kind of like a bear market right now. And there's still people that are building and there's still people that are making like awesome things and doing really cool on the ground work. So it's just a testament to like how important I think these technologies are.
Interesting. I love this conversation. I studied geology undergrad, so this whole entire environmental sustainability and use of blockchain for me is like, exciting. So,
Yeah.
uh, you know, um, so I want to get into that green card, right?
Yeah.
Your project is leveraging decentralized technologies, blockchain, and others to monitor and reduce the environmental impacts of networks and businesses. How do you do it, and how does your solution also combat the magic word, which is the magic word is greenwashing?
Yes, I'm very excited to get into this. So yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we're using Filecoin and IPFS, which is fully decentralized data storage. Everything we do is built on top of those things. About a year ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, we started to recognize a problem that we were having in our work and a problem that a lot of other refi regenerative finance projects were having. And that was that Web3 is kind of underpowered when it comes to making claims about the real world, making claims about things online, the kind of blockchain, cryptocurrency, like all of those things, we got that down in the Web3 space. But making claims about actual real things, about sustainability claims, about carbon credits, there's a ton of potential there, but it's underpowered right now. And so we because of this, we started to like think about how can we build again as kind of a data infrastructure piece. I think we sit at a really awesome place in the ecosystem to be able to help a ton of different projects. So we started to think about, there's so many projects that are reinventing this common set of features for being able to prove their claims, to be able to prove carbon credits or prove that they're sustainable, to prove that I'm a green storage provider. So we wanted to build infrastructure that gives these projects kind of the functionality that they need right out of the box. And so our kind of our test of this, our MVP of this was something we built out called CO2.storage. And that is a provenance preserving Web3 data solution. So it has the decentralized data storage on Filecoin. It has the ability like for compute and for the provenance tracking. That's where all of our like green card or our energy validation process, all of that data is stored on CO2.storage. And again, that was just kind of our MVP. And we also, with that, we're really focused on transparency behind carbon offsets. And so with that, we made a ton of data from carbon offsets, from other environmental assets, so things like renewable energy certificates, readily available on the decentralized web, stored on IPFS and Filecoin. And so we were able to take blockchain's kind of granular tracking functionality and the information sharing infrastructure of Web3 and bring transparency to, for carbon credits, a very murky, unclear kind of industry. And so I think overall with that, going back to that question of like greenwashing, there is a growing, like very significantly growing need for more transparency and stronger provenance of data. I mean, we're seeing environmental regulations advancing like exponentially. We're seeing even things like greenwashing lawsuits coming out of the UK and the EU and US companies. So it's like we need more transparency and we need better provenance of data to be able to combat those things. And I think a lot of the existing provenance and kind of attestation systems that currently are around don't really address the growing needs of supporting these really complex claims that go into sustainability. There's a ton of inputs, a ton of data going into these things. There's a ton of like arbitrary functions going into these things, and the existing systems that we have just aren't really well suited to do that. And so we started kind of with our energy validation process, putting all that information on CO2.storage, working with people in the carbon credit space and putting that information, that data on CO2.storage. And I think like we're always just thinking about like what else can we do. And so now we're expanding beyond just carbon credits with that strong focus on greenwashing, on environmental claims, with something I think I mentioned it earlier already, something new we're working on called Operad. And so for us, Operad is a solution for how you prove your claims to the world. It combines decentralized data storage, it combines compute and data transformations with provenance tracking. Usually like all of those things are kind of separate and we're marrying them and bringing them all together, which I think is really, really critical for being able to make verifiable sustainability claims. And, you know, we believe that if you're going to make a claim that should be validated and auditable. And so with Operad, you have this pipeline where data is coming in on one side, there's everything tracked, and then you're able to run the computations, the calculations that you need, and then get the output of the claim to be able to say, again, going back to the energy validation process, I'm a green storage provider. And so that's kind of the direction that we're moving in now, which is super exciting. And I think there's a ton of use cases even beyond sustainability. I think like with AI and kind of the misinformation element that is like going to become increasingly more important, that ties into this too. But overall, I think our big kind of goal is that, you know, sustainability claims are verifiable and auditable and they're on Web3 technologies, because there's nowhere else, no one else that is going to be better at doing that than Web3, I think.
Interesting. You know, I back in my corporate career, I worked in property casualty insurance. So, you know, land and stuff like that for claims, and you know, I was manager for that. But you know, my next question was going to be how we do it, but you explained how we do it. Why should we use Web3 infrastructures to track those claims and not the traditional infrastructures that had previously existed?
Yeah, I think for Web3 infrastructures, so I mean, even just blockchain, taking like one sliver of the Web3 pie, blockchain is literally built to have these publicly verifiable like records and attestations. And so like I really just think that there's nowhere or no technology that I know of in the kind of traditional Web2 world that is as well suited to address those things as Web3 technologies are. And I think, you know, I'm not saying that like Web3 or the regenerative finance movement alone are going to save the world. I think like that's just not true. But I think there's just with how we work in Web3, having publicly verifiable information, working out in the open, which so many projects do, and like at Protocol Labs, that's a big kind of part of our work is working out in the open, working publicly. I think a lot of those kind of ethos can be translated to the sustainability in the ESG world. And I think, again, going back to kind of carbon credits, because that is where this is most apparent right now, there already exists solutions within Web3 that like projects like ours and projects that we're working on are building to address those transparency concerns, those greenwashing concerns, the lack of verifiable data behind those claims. Like there's projects that are already existing that are building those things. And so I think, I don't know, it just makes sense. It makes like for our team, it's like we've again spent the last 2 years looking at this very niche intersection of sustainability and Web3 technologies. And I think for us, it's just like a natural fit and synergy. And again, going back to like other use cases, supply chains, like there's a ton of supply chain companies that I wouldn't even classify as like Web3 companies that are still using blockchain technologies. And I think that's like kind of that's a further conversation or maybe tangential, but I think all of us getting to a point where it's like, it doesn't matter on the front end, or like for me, it's like, I don't care that it's a Web3 or a blockchain thing. I want that to become so natural in the new internet that it's like, you don't even think about those things. It's just the progression of where Web3 is moving.
It's a theme. It's a theme. The user has been the common theme, no matter if you're in, whatever finance you're in. So it's a recurring theme. And I want to talk about, you said this regenerative finance movement, right? And you mentioned carbon credits. How can overall carbon credit systems be used to encourage and drive further this regenerative finance movement and this global movement for emissions reporting and sustainability?
That's an awesome question. I think one of the promises of Web3 kind of broadly, but specifically with like Web3 carbon credit solutions, is unlocking climate finance at scale. And so for things like the voluntary carbon markets, the carbon credits, renewable energy markets, even ESG and sustainability reporting, they are so complex and so hard to navigate that it's like impossible for people to, I mean, I've met people who are in ESG corporate sustainability roles who, when I ask them about carbon credits or like, what's your decision-making process when you're buying carbon credits or deciding who to buy it from? They're like, I don't know. I don't know what makes a good carbon credit. And that's not to anybody's fault. Like, it's a very nascent space and there's so much unknown and it's kind of like the wild, wild west. And so, yeah, like voluntary carbon markets, renewable energy markets, ESG reporting, it's all so complex and hard to navigate. And I think with this kind of decentralized movement, this regenerative finance movement, moving towards those ideals of decentralization and transparency, we are also unlocking, going back to that conversation, like that question earlier about like voices for the voiceless, we're enabling accessibility for people who traditionally wouldn't be able to get involved in these carbon markets. In carbon credits, like I mentioned, we have projects that we're working with that are working directly with project developers, people on the ground in Africa, to build out really good methodologies for monitoring and reporting and verifying their data about their projects, because that's a really big piece of carbon credits. It's like the on the ground work needs to have the monitoring and the reporting and the verifying to be able to actually, come to the market and be able to be traded. And there's also a lot of really awesome work in addition to the methodologies that are being built around including things like drones and satellite imagery and AI and machine learning models to do a better job of, tracking deforestation, for example, in an area. There's really cool like ML models that enable you to see like so finely like the tree coverage in an area and to be able to like very clearly see if an area is being deforested or not. And I think all of that is just enabling a more open, transparent carbon credit system. And it's going to just continue to help funnel more money and financing into climate projects. And I think also just being able to connect buyers on this side with producers on this side is another thing that this space kind of unlocks, which is super exciting.
Let's see. I think it's exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have coming down the pike. I do want to go back to two words that you said that are not so apparent to me at this current moment, and those words are bear market. It does everything on everybody's screen today and yesterday has been green. You know, not environmental, but green. But when I think about that, I'm like, I expect DeFi, I expect GameFi, I expect this other FIs to be part of the next bull cycle. What do you think? What do you see for the 1 year, 2 year cycle and the role of regenerative finance and maybe onboarding the next million or billion users into Web3?
Mm-hmm. I think we're also going to be on that bull run, or at least I hope so. I guess what I expect to see or what I hope to see is just better user experience. Again, especially because a lot of projects are working with people in Africa, in South America, in working with projects that, like, when you're taking a picture of a tree on the ground to be able to go back and say that this is going into this carbon credit, this data is, like, when you're taking that picture on the ground, you maybe don't have access to good internet. And so, like, just those types of user experience things, I think there's a lot of awesome work that's going into that. And I think that needs to get better. And I expect to see that being better in the next couple of years. I think just even like the name regenerative finance, I think will continue to be more in the vernacular, especially as we move beyond just like the carbon credit space. There's so much work going into things like biodiversity credits and taking like inspiration from the voluntary carbon market and carbon credits and tying it to things like biodiversity. There's a really cool project that is like doing work gathering eDNA. So like gathering DNA from rivers and forests and being able to measure the biodiversity in an area, turning that into like data and then, you know, putting that, again, working with this kind of decentralized, transparent way of doing things and then tying that to credits. So I think more cool things like that are going to continue to come out and evolve. And I think also, again, continuing to work with people in the traditional sustainability world, in the traditional ESG world, I think we're going to start to see like a very clear, or again, at least I hope to see a very clearly like it'll just make sense. It's like, why wouldn't I use Web3 technology to do these things? And so yeah, all of that to say, I think refi will definitely be part of the next bull market. And I honestly, like, with sustainability and climate just kind of more broadly, we don't really have a choice, in my opinion, but to think about these things. You know, our as the world that we are today, our emissions and our environmental impacts are just continuing to grow. And I think in order for this Web3 space to take off and to be mainstream, and to, you know, be just seamless for users, a really big piece of that is responding to these sustainability things. You know, from a data storage perspective, which is, you know, the kind of world that I come from, Web2 players already have these renewable energy, you know, goals, targets that they're hitting. And if Web3 wants to be a legitimate player, we need to be on that same level. So I think there's a lot of work to do, and it's a very exciting time to do those things. I think progress gets made in a bear market. And so I do think that in a year or two, we'll be trucking along with DeFi and all these other awesome things.
Well, I hope to bring you back in a year or less and see where you're at.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to be amazed, I'm sure. So thank you.
Yeah.
I want to thank you very much for your time today. This has been a wonderful conversation. I enjoy speaking with you. And I have one last question. It's probably the easiest one. How can people find out more information about you, about the Filecoin Green Team? How can they follow along or join in your endeavors? How can they do any of that?
Yes. Okay. If you go to green dot filecoin, that will take you to our website that has a ton of information, a ton more like really in the weeds details about all the work that we've done for the Filecoin network. If you coming in a couple of weeks, we're, like I said, launching this new product called Operad. That's that how you prove your claims to the world. So in a couple weeks, you'll be able to go to operad.ai and check out our awesome website that we've built and the tool that we're building. And I think that's one of the best ways for people to plug into us. Filecoin Green on Twitter. We have a Medium, Filecoin Green, so you can read some of our blog posts. There's tons of ways for people to connect with us. SBS.tech if you want to learn more about the Sustainable Blockchain Summit. We have actually recordings of like all of the previous talks. So if you really want to like just consume all of the refi sustainable blockchain things, that's an awesome resource to be able to learn about these things and check out all of the really, really awesome projects and amazing people that are building in this space.
I will check that out. I hope my listeners do as well. So thank you very much for your time today.
Yes, thank you.